Hey there, this is the content for a webinar from Monday on how missionaries deal with being overworked. And I wanted to go ahead and just get the content to you at least. And hopefully you'll be able to join us for our next webinar. These have been really, really helpful opportunity to really connect with each other, which has been the best part of it. But then also to be able to share a little bit of content that's helpful. And so today what I want to talk about is how missionaries deal with being overworked. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I chose this topic, and then also about, I think, kind of the three core reasons why missionaries feel overworked, and then one thing that you can do right now that will help with that. So that's what we'll do today. Um, so the reason I chose this topic is because of how prevalent it is. Let me show you this spreadsheet here. This is kind of the raw data from my research on missionary resiliency, and I asked missionaries to list their top three stressors. And as you can see, conflict with coworkers was number one, and then number two was being overworked. And those two are quite a bit more prevalent than the next one down, which is cultural stress. So that's why we're talking about being overworked today. And then when we look at those same stressors, I'll show you this sheet, by how people score on this resiliency scale, you can see that for people who score the lowest, feeling overworked is kind of their number four. The second lowest, number four. The average, which is the vast majority of people, the feeling overworked is number two, and the second highest is it's number two. But then when you get to the very highest, people who have who score the highest on this resiliency scale, these are two standard deviation above the average. Feeling overworked is comes down to number six, and so there's a sense in which missionaries who are feeling, who are scoring the highest in this resiliency scale, have figured out how to deal with being overworked, and so it made sense to me to make that a focus of this webinar. The other reason is this is something I certainly deal with, and I know that many of us do. It's a real concern for us, and so it's one that I personally feel the pressure of, being with just kind of all that I have happening in my life, and I know you do too. So I wanted to have a chance to kind of think through this a little bit together. So here are what I think are the three main causes of missionaries feeling overworked. The first is a spiritual reason. The second is an efficiency reason, and the third is a kind of identity reason. So we'll talk about those three now. The first is the spiritual. You know, when Jesus, when the disciples with the feeding of the 5,000, that's why I keep this picture right here on my desk for that to remind me of this. They're kind of freaking out, like what are we going to do about this hungry multitude in the wilderness? And Jesus says to them, "You give them something to eat." In Mark, and it's an impossible thing, right? And most of us got into missions because we were really succeeding at life that was possible. And when life is possible and it gets stressful, you can just push ahead a little bit, lean in, kind of put some elbow grease in it, put your back into it, right? You can kind of push through it. But when life is impossible, you just that approach is the exact wrong approach. I remember learning that when I was very early in my ministry. I was working at a boarding school and for at-risk youth, and I was doing everything with 150%. I mean, even my paperwork I did with 150%. But of course, as you can imagine, the one thing I was not doing at 150% was taking care of myself. And I remember the last few weeks that I was there, I would wake up in panic attacks, and I was breaking out in hives, and my body was just collapsing on me because I was not taking care of of myself. I was just trying to push through it as if somehow I would one day get, I could get to the end of the work on my desk, and then I'd be able to relax. And so that's just not the case. So when life is impossible, we can abide there, certainly, but we have to do it very differently than we abide when life is possible. And the key, I think, is to that on the kind of spiritual front is actually Moses's words to the Israelites as they are they've got their backs to the sea, and Pharaoh's army is descending upon them. Chariots are charging towards them. And Moses says to them in Exodus 14:14, he says, "The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be still." The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be still. And when life is impossible, that's what we need to do. We need to be still and allow the Lord to fight for us. I want to invite you right now, actually, to just think about a place in your life where you need the Lord to fight for you, where you need to be still. And just get a piece of paper and write that down. And you can pause this video if you need to do that for a second. Okay, good. Part of that, fostering that attitude of allowing the Lord to fight for us, is maintaining kind of Sabbath rhythms and rest. And I was talking with one of our missionaries recently, who's a veteran, 18 years in Romania, and he was talking about this, how he will go to the monastery for a couple of days, a couple of times a year, and he has a kind of rhythm to his evening that allows him to kind of switch gears and relax, and those sorts of habits really support that, fostering that attitude of God is in control and He will fight for us. So that, I think, is one of the factors with the spiritual component, that to be a disciple is in fact to follow Jesus into these impossible places, and in order to do that, we need to allow God to fight for us. And one of the ways that we do that is that we maintain rhythms of Sabbath. So there's a lot more to say about that, but I want to keep this video short, so we'll just pause there. The second factor is that in our that leads to missionaries feeling overworked is how many balls we have spinning and plates in the air and confused metaphors, right? We've got so much going on. You think about it's very common to think about these two works that you have: the work that you're doing in the field, and then you have the work that you're doing for your organization, and then you have the work you're doing with your supporters. And each of these is multiple things, and then you have multiple full-time jobs, right? And so we just have so much going on, and it's very, very easy to get sort of lost in that, in the distress of that, and to not have a sense of like, where do we need to focus, and how do we need to spend our time, and we get really inefficient in that sense. So that's something that I've dealt with being in school and working on a big research project that's kind of its own thing, and working in missionary care and raising support for that position, and having a small private practice. And it's just, I've got a lot of things going on. And so it's at any one time. So the what do we do about that kind of sense of how do we kind of get more effective, right? And the two things that have helped me out immensely with this are, one is a book called Essentialism, and the second is a concept called MED. So let me tell you a little bit about the book Essentialism, and I'll put a link below if you'd like to pick up a copy of it. So in this book, Ian McGrone, I think, talks about these two attitudes of people who are essentialists and people who are non-essentialist. He says that the non-essentialist, looks at their life and says that I have to, that it's all important and I can do it all. And that kind of attitude of I have to do all of it, it's all important, that is the sort of non-essentialist attitude. And he juxtaposes that to the attitude of the essentialist, which says, actually probably very little of it's important. And while I can't do all of it, I choose to do what I do, right? And he kind of fleshes those out and kind of gives some ways to kind of put that system into place. It's a really good book. But that attitude of essentialism is so important. What is the most essential thing, for us to be focused on, and how do we make the space in our life to give that one thing focus? And what do we say no to in order to do that? My youth pastor growing up used to say, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And that right there is essentialism. And it's such an attitude that we need in missions, for sure. And we need to foster in missions, for sure. The second is, and this is kind of part of how you make space, is this idea. I picked this up from Tim Ferriss, I think, that it's a medical term called minimum effective dose, MED. And he talks about it as a prescription term, right? That you want the dosage of a medication that is the high enough to get the effect, but low enough to not get the side effects. And he applies that to life, and I think that's a fantastic thing. So let me tell you how I do this in my marriage, right? When we were younger, we had more money and more time, and what it meant to kind of feed our marriage was, we go out to eat or go to movies or do those kinds of things. Now we have a kid and we're both in school, and so the idea of investing our relationship in that way is just not sustainable. But we also need to continue to invest in our relationship, right? And so what we do is once a week we'll go to Starbucks and we'll split a large latte, and it's, and so we're having those 2 hours in the morning when our son's at school, and it costs us $5 for the week, and because we're splitting a drink, and but we have this time to really listen to each other and really connect with each other, and it really feeds our relationship. So it's the minimum effective dose, right? And when you start doing minimum effective dose in a lot of the areas of your life, you'll see that, and apply that with kind of that essentialism, that central focus. I think that's one of the ways we deal with the feeling overworked that all of us do. So the first reason is a spiritual reason. We're invited to join Jesus in his mission in the world, and it's an impossible thing. We cannot possibly do it alone. Second, we have so much on our plates that it's easy for us to become non-essentialist and easy for us to become maximalist, and that's not sustainable. And so what we need to do is focus on that, keeping the main thing, and do the minimum effective dose with that. The third has to do with kind of an identity piece, and I'm taking this from a book called Cycle of Grace, where this is an idea came from a psychologist, I forget his name, who was looking at missionaries who burned out and seeing how their life was very different than the life of Jesus, and how Jesus approached ministry, and juxtapose those. And one of those factors is that we can approach our work with as a means towards achievement and acceptance and support, as instead of from a place of being grounded in our identity and being filled up and supported then reaching out. Um, and so that piece is a really also important piece, that we can overwork ourselves in our own efforts. So to kind of prove ourselves, right? So, and I think all of us are tempted to that uh, in various seasons of our life. So, those are just real quick, kind of three reasons that lead us to being overworked in missions. And what I want to do is give you just one activity that you can do right now today that can help. Um, so in the beginning, we talked about, let me show this to you here real quick. So this is just a real simple distress worksheet here. In the beginning, we talked about, that like when life is possible, you can just sort of push through it, and when life is impossible, you have to abide in a different way. And one of the keys to that is becoming aware of when you are stressed and de-stressed, and putting on the brakes at that point, and retreating, and kind of taking care of yourself, and that fostering that inner peace where our best work comes out of, right? And so what I want you to do is just to look at the sheet. You can download. Well, I think I'm going to email you a copy of this. You can download it, and I want you to write down in the "I know I'm calm when" box. When you're what's happening in your body. What are your sort of behaviors or thoughts or emotions or cravings when life is calm, when you're calm? What's happening with you when that's the case? And then I want you to think about the sort of, the yellow light, right? When you're starting to get stressed, tired, what's happening? What's happening in your body? What's happening in your behavior, your thoughts, your emotions, your cravings? I know for me, I like always crave Chinese food when I'm stressed, right? And I feel this pressure in my neck and my shoulders, right? I also have I'll have some more like insomnia, those are kind of some of the things that I deal with when I'm feeling stressed, right? And then what about when you're de-stressed, when you're just distressed, where you're just totally, you're just frozen? What's happening for you then? I know for myself, before I learned this, I would especially at the end of the semester, I would just overwork myself to the point where I'd get physically sick for like a couple of days because I just kept pushing through. And so when I start to get sick, and I've got, I know that I'm distressed. I know that I have gone too far. So go ahead and kind of write down what's happening for you in these areas. And then what is an action that you can do to get back to calm? Write that in each of these. And for me, I will tell you that some things that really helped me is returning to my prayer rule, eating a nutritious meal, taking a long but gentle walk, something like a hot shower, having a stress reducing conversation with my wife or with a friend, journaling. Those are all things that really, really help me. And in fact, I have a list here on the second page, and these are all kind of research-based ways to help us move from distressed and stressed back to calm. And when you look at this list, I know that you will see things on here that you already do. And so put a check mark by the things that you already do. And I know that you'll also see on this list a few things that you'd be willing to try. And so put a check box by a few things that you're willing to try. And then post this someplace. And the next time that you're feeling overworked, take a look and see, are you in the sort of the yellow zone of stressed, or are you in the red zone of distressed? And what do you need to do to get back to calm? So that's it for today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.